my family have been in Jamaica for 200 years, and that's really where my family had their roots. But then I was only for 2 weeks in Chicago before I went back to Jamaica with my family. And then from there my father left Jamaica and went to live in New England, where I went to school, went to Harvard, and I spent my first 17 years in America. And I'd always wanted to be a soldier, as many of my family had been. And I was always fascinated by the British Empire and thought it would be a nice thing to go and patrol all that pink. And so eventually I got a nomination by the Governor General of Canada to go to Sandhurst without any examination and so forth, because I wasn't studying the right things in my school in New England. But I got a nomination, and I got into Sandhurst without any examination. And then from there, I was gazetted into the 8th Hussars, and as was normal when your regiment was abroad, mine was in Cairo, you spent up to a year with a cavalry regiment that was in England, in my case the Scots Greys, who were in Scotland. So I spent about a year in Edinburgh and Aldershot with the Scots Greys before going to Cairo. And then from Cairo the regiment went to Palestine for a year in 1937, and when the war came, I had just decided that I was getting short of money and I would have to go to one of the colonial forces who paid double. And in my case, I decided on the West African Frontier Force, the Nigeria Regiment, based in Kano. And I was on my way to Kano when the war broke out. I thought, oh, well, I'm going to miss the war. And that's really, it would be a disgrace for a regular officer to be in Nigeria when all the fighting is taking place in the Seaford line. I was quite wrong about that. And so I went to Kano, and joined the 2nd Battalion of the Nigeria Regiment, and went with them when the Italians came in the war. I went with them to East Africa. I was then seconded from them to an armored car regiment which was being raised in East Africa, and with the commanding a squadron of that regiment, I was very lucky in that my squadron was the vanguard of the 12th Division that went from Kenya through Somaliland up the Rift Valley to Addis Ababa, and I had first contact with the Italians for nearly 2,000 miles.
You drove all that way?
Yeah, with my squadron. We went across the Juba River to Isha Baidoa, back into Abyssinia at Ngeli, up the Rift Valley, and then at that time Addis had fallen, and I was allowed to leave them because they would have been simply, they were a local regiment who had joined up to defend their own country, and they would have not been operative in the rest of the war. So I wanted to go back to my own regiment, which I did. I went back to Egypt just as the operation called Crusader in November 1941 was about to start to relieve Tobruk. And cut a long story short, it was during the Battle of Sidi Rezaiq, which I think was probably the first real tank battle that we'd had in the war, because in France we were so busy trying to get away from the Germans that we really never had a battle, and we didn't have any tanks anyway. But Sidi Rezaiq went on for about 10 days, and we had a battle every morning and every evening. During the first week, I was captured one night. I was captured, as a matter of fact, by Rommel's headquarters. I was on foot because it was a confusing situation, which I won't go into here. But I was on foot, having left my car, and I was captured by Rommel's headquarters. And Rommel was there sitting on his tank smoking a cigar. And we had heard during the fighting, where we'd suffered very severe casualties and a lot of tanks destroyed, we had heard, our information was that we were making a very, very big dent in the German armored. The reason we thought this was because we were in a tank called the Honey, which was very fast but very badly armed and with a very weak gun. And when we fired that gun and it hit the German Mark IV, we counted that as a casualty. Rommel said, they don't make any dent on us at all. He said, unless you hit the precise spot where the turret joins the main body, we don't pay any attention to you. So all the time we thought we were knocking tanks out. We were doing nothing at all. And Rommel said, well, you haven't made any impression on my army at all, and we'll finish your boys off in the next few days. Well, of course, I never knew whether they did it or not, because I was captured. He put a cigar in his mouth. I said, look, General, I spoke German. I said, I don't see, there's no point in keeping me. I'm just, I can't do anything. So it's better for you to let me go. He said, no. He said, we don't do that sort of thing. And he took his cigar out, put the ashes down, drove off in his tank, said, anyway, good luck. But he certainly didn't say, oh no, it doesn't matter, you can go back. And then of course, I was taken to Italy, and that's where my prison life began.
The Germans handed it over?
Yes, you see, the Italians, we had a tremendous number of Italian prisoners of war, probably 250,000. There were 250,000 in Abyssinia alone, and that doesn't count the ones that O'Connor had taken, and so on. And so we had a lot of, and the Italians had no prisoners, so the Germans had agreed that any prisoner taken by them or anyone else would be handed over to the Italians. And that's where, so everyone captured in North Africa went to Italy. No one went to Germany.
What was the first camp you went to in Italy?
In Italy? It was at Bari. Then one was at Piacenza. There was another one at Padula, the biggest monastery in Europe in the south, which is in the book. Then I was at Gavi, and then after the capitulation, we were taken by the SS because Gavi was considered to be a dangerous place. And most camps in Italy were, the commandant simply opened the gates when the capitulation came and said, it's over to you now. Gavi was considered dangerous, and we were taken over by the SS as the capitulation was signed. We never had 1 hour of freedom. It was a terrible disappointment. And we were taken by the SS, and immediately, and David Sterling and I got away in Innsbruck when the train arrived there. And of course, we didn't know where we were. Neither of us ever been in Innsbruck, not in Innsbruck, in Austria. So we didn't really know where, but we did know that the Inn River rose in Switzerland, so that if we followed it, we might get to Switzerland. So that's what we tried to do.
Going back to Gavi for a moment, it was like Colditz at Sonderlager, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So did you get sent there for the same reasons that people were sent to Colditz?
Yes, exactly. But escapers. All the people there were only about 150 of us. All had escaped from.
So you'd escaped from some of these other camps?
I'd escaped from 3 times before.
Oh, so you've really upset the Italians.
Yeah.
And they sent you to Gavi. What sort of escapes were they? Tunnels or?
No. The first one, 2 from the biggest monastery in Europe, Padula, south of Naples, where it's quite complicated to describe, but myself and I hadn't joined up with David Sterling by that time, but with a very gallant Scots barrister called Alistair Cram, who was a very good partner. And we got out by devious and very complicated ways, nothing to do with tunnels, to do with the geography of the architecture of the place, and getting into here and out of there and over this roof and into that. So we got out of that once, and then we were put back in, and we got out of it again. And then we went to Gavi.
Were you, when you escaped from these other places, were you prepared in as much as you had civilian clothes, documents?
In Italy, in the monastery, we had clothes and food, but we didn't need them because we were captured too soon after our escape, 4 or 5 days. From Gavi, I lost everything when I fell off the wall. And we'd collected food, and but I did have money, which is what turned out to be what I needed, because it allowed me to take the train to Genoa, and from Genoa to Milan, and from Milan to the border.
You were saying, in the book you mentioned that you suddenly realised that although there were 11 of you attempting to escape, you were on your own. Did you find out what happened to the others?
What, at Gavi?
Gavi.
Oh, they were captured on the plateau where we were captured. They were shot at and captured, and I got away because I evaded the muddle of all the people shouting and screaming and firing.
Must have been chaotic.
It was absolutely chaotic, and Italians get very excited. And I avoided them, got to the wall, and then the rope that we were supposed to go out broke, and I didn't know whether I was going to fall 2 feet. Turned out that I fell 50 feet, and when I went back about 2 years ago, I was absolutely amazed that I survived. The reason I did was because the slope of the ground was so steep that when I dropped to 40 feet, which I did when the rope broke, the slope took this strain, and I wasn't hurt at all. I was very, very lucky.
But you were telling me about you got away from there.
Yes.
You were the only one of the 11 who got away.
Yes, they all caught on the plat.
And you then decided to go south instead of directly to.
Yes, because I knew they would look north, because the only place to go was Switzerland. So I'd resolved anyway, for the time being, to stay there. And in the south, I stayed in the river, standing in the river for 2 days. Well, the because they turned out a whole division to look for us. The Italians were lavish in this way, and prisoners were to them extremely important. And I knew they'd do this. So, as I say, I stayed in a river for 2 days. Well, the searchers got farther and farther away, and then after 2 days I reckoned they'd be pretty far away, so then I went south.
That was a pretty wet escape, wasn't it? Because
It was
you
a
had
wet-
to swim through the
Yeah,
underground reservoir to get out.
I had to do that, but I also stayed in the river off and on for 2 days, and then I started south over the Ligurian mountains for Genoa.
Just going back to the actual escape itself, you say in your book that you built this tunnel, but that was through solid granite, is that right?
That's through solid granite. We would never have been able to do it if we didn't have 3 South African mining engineers in our team. They knew how to deal with rock and so forth. I mean, if it had been David Sterling, Alistair Cram and myself, I don't think we would ever have done it. But these mining engineers, they did all sorts of things like heating the rock and then putting cold water on it and cracking it and so forth. So the actual escaping part, really I can take no credit at all for having...
But nonetheless, it was an incredible feat. We hear of these tunnels through sand, but through granite.
That's right.
It's something completely different.
We went down and opened out into the reservoir under that level of rock, and yes, we had to swim it. Then we had to get through the hole which the South Africans had been mainly responsible for, and they had, being surveyors and mining engineers, they had calculated so that it came out exactly on the what do you call it, of the roof, exactly. It was, but we take David and Alistair and I take absolutely no credit for having done that, and took us across the roof and then down onto the landing. I went back a few years ago, or a year ago, I don't know, and when I saw what we had done, I could hardly believe it.
The hole must still be there.
Oh yes, it's part of the. It's now a place for tourists because it's a very grand castle, and one of the big medieval castles still existing, and it's the thing they show tourists.
Is it still in good condition?
Yeah, perfect.
Is it really?
Kept in good condition because it's a show site for the Italian. I don't think I have a picture of it.
There's a picture in the book.
Picture in the book.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No.
You were going over the mountains, the Ligurian mountains, yeah?
Went over the Ligurian mountains down into Genoa. Because I was happy in cities because I spoke Italian, and you weren't conspicuous in a city. If you were in a small mountain village, you stuck up like a sore thumb. But I could circulate in Genoa, and I could circulate in Milan, particularly as I spoke the language. I had some money, and I could go into cheap cafes and get some spaghetti and so forth. So I went from Genoa on the train to Milan, which was hair-raising because it was Easter Day and absolutely jammed with people, and also because of that, a lot of carabinieri. And then, as I say, to the border and so on.
There was this incident where they, on one of the smaller trains, I believe, where they came around collecting or checking documents.
Yeah. I was very lucky. I got a long way without any check, But on the way to the border between Milan and Stresa, they came collecting documents, and then I did something which I never knew until a few years ago, was what was done in the three, what is Buchan's book?
39 Steps.
39 Steps, when a man, for a different reason, was being searched for, and when they were close to him, put his arm around a girl, put his head near to her, and the other people were embarrassed to interfere with him. And I did that, but I didn't do it because of that. I did it because it seemed to me, as it did to Buchan's man, the only thing I could do.
So, when you got to the border, you were very close to the border. You could see Switzerland across the lake.
Lake Maggiore goes from about 25 miles south of the border right up to Switzerland and then turns away.
And you were...
But I didn't know where it was or anything. I'd read Hemingway's book, and I knew that he'd escaped there in a small motorboat from Intra, which is halfway up. That's all I knew. One was really always moving in totally unknown territory, and to a certain extent lucky.
What were you doing for food all this time?
It wasn't food that was the problem, because I could buy food. I had money later on in the Tyrol and in some parts of Germany. We went a couple of days without food. It was sleep, which we were short of, and sleep makes you fantasize about things, and tiredness and sleep were the real hazards. In Italy I had plenty of food. In Germany, as you probably learned later on in Tyrol, we had neither food nor sleep. And we were in shirt sleeves in November, swimming the rivers and so on. So there was a certain amount of hardship, I must admit.
And it was because of sleep that you were captured this
Yes.
first time from Gavi.
And it was because of sleep that one eventually got so tired that one wasn't really functioning properly. This is what happened to us in the Tyrol and later on in Czechoslovakia. We found that our judgment had gone. So, well, we didn't know it had gone at the time, because you don't realize that.
This first time from Gavi, you were on your own. So I think you were telling me that you went into some undergrowth that you thought you'd be safe in to sleep, and that's where you were found.
Yeah, on the edge of the lake. It looked so thick that I thought I could hardly get into it to hide myself. I thought nobody's going to look in here because it's impossible to get in. But as I say, they were looking for a black marketeer who had escaped from Milan, and they'd been looking for him for a week. And they'd gone through their rhododendrons every day. It was very bad luck.
It was bad luck.
Very bad luck.
And so you finished back in Gavi.
Yeah.
And you were there and then till the Italian capitulation?
Until we were taken by the SS to Austria.
And where did they put you in Austria?
Well, we escaped from the train in Innsbruck and walked along the Tyrol to the border. We were captured again crossing a small guarded bridge. Then we were put into a Russian prisoner of war camp. We got out of that into the Inn River, swam it fully clothed, with the guards having free shots at us as we were swept down the river. It wasn't a pleasant experience, because we had to swim the river, and the current was very fast. The Inn River itself is quite a wide river. We were sitting ducks for, I should think, nearly 10 minutes. They didn't get us.
That was the three of you?
No, only David and me.
Just the two.
Yeah.
Where was it you met up with Alistair Cram?
At the monastery in south of Naples. I spotted him as being really serious escaper. Everyone talked about escape, but most people didn't do it, or they weren't worth collaborating. But he was really serious. I could see that, and I was right to choose him as a partner, because he was, first of all, I had no experience with mountains. He was a mountaineer, as was David Sterling. So that was, I would rely on them. They relied on me for the city talk, talking to the people, dealing with what I'd call the urban side of things, and I was relying on them to negotiate the mountains.
Where had you learned your languages?
I knew Italian before the war. When I was in Italy, I learned German. When
you say in Italy, you mean in the prison camps?
In the prison camps. I learned German. There were Yugoslavs there who had been at Berlin University and taught us and so forth. And I studied German very hard when I was in Italy, not realizing that I was going to use it. I just did it as something to do.
It turned out to be very useful.
It turned out to be extremely useful.
So you were in the river, River Inn.
Yes.
And how did you come to get captured again? Oh, well, you said on the bridge, sorry.
No, we were captured on the bridge, put into the Russian camp, escaped into the river, and then went up the mountains and toward Yugoslavia, and were captured again because we had no sleep and no food. We had nothing.
Captured by the Germans?
Yeah. And then sent to Berlin for interrogation. Taking us 600 miles by train to interrogate us. What about? A very big moving population after the Italian capitulation. People going from Italy to Austria to Germany to somewhere else. And they suspected that there were spies among them. So when we got to, it was a place called Luckenwalde, just outside Berlin, which was the Gestapo headquarters. They gave us a very cursory examination because it was quite clear that we weren't one of the people that they were looking for. So we were only there for 2 nights. And then we were sent to Eichstätt, which was, as you know, the prison that held most of the people from Dunkirk. It was established and had food and parcels and so forth. And we were there for about 6 weeks before they sent us to Czechoslovakia.
Which you went to in Czechoslovakia?
To Maris Trubau, which was in Moravia, more or less Sudeten Czechoslovakia. And this is where I managed to get contact with the Czech resistance, and which we got, all took place at the time when Stalag Luft 3, 50 prisoners were shot. And so we were in a very, very delicate thing, because they suspected David and me of being involved in that, and also that we were in touch with the Czech resistance, which they were indeed, which we were. I contacted them, as you know, from the book, in the church, and we had all sorts of things that we were going to do, and they were quite right to suspect us. I never knew why they didn't separate us, because we were obviously a team, but they never did. Anyway, it was then we were sent from Maris Trubau to Brunswick, because they evacuated the entire Maris Trubau camp of 3,000 of us, because they suspected a general uprising. And they had every right to think so too, because, and it was a very naughty thing for the British government to do. At the time of the invasion in June 44, the BBC started to put out calls to prisoners all over Europe to rise up and throw off their... And of course, this was something which the Germans had every right to pay attention to. And they continued to do it right up until September, October. So by the time we'd been sent to Brunswick, which was where we went from Marisch-Trubau, and then from Brunswick to Colditz, the Germans had, I think quite rightly, made it an order that any prisoner who tried to escape would be shot. And all of us would be perfectly happy to be shot at if you were trying to make a escape. But you didn't want to be captured and then shot in the back of the head. And so there was no escaping it whatever after July 1944.
So how long would you have been in Marisch-Trubau?
We were there from January 44 from January 44 to July 44, and then sent to Colditz.
So you'd got this liaison with the underground people set up very quickly then? In Czechoslovakia, yes. Entirely due to my being able to get into a hospital that had a chapel, where I got nurses to contact resistance representatives who came to the chapel. I would never have had this freedom if I hadn't been in a hospital. No.
And
then when you got to Colditz, you attempted to do the same thing with Checo as a...
Yeah, but that was when the war was just getting to its end, and the Germans were more inclined to help you in ways which they otherwise would never have done, certainly in the previous 4 years. And we really set up a little anti-Nazi group in the town of Colditz, which was an unusual thing to happen in Germany, and as I say, would never have happened unless the war were drawing to its close and they started to be anxious perhaps to help and get a letter from you to say that you'd helped and so forth.
It was, I was interested to see that you had a particular helper, Heinz. Was that in Colditz?
Particular what?
Helper, one of the Germans you knew, you'd got in touch with Heinz.
Oh yes, there was a guard, and the person who really made it possible, I think you know from the book, was the Czech aviator, Checo, who had a very good-looking and attractive person, and an anti-Nazi girl in the Colditz town fell madly in love with him and would do anything that he asked her to do. And it was through that route that we were able to get in touch with people in the village that would, for instance, she organized that the switchboard at in the Colditz Kommandantur, all the messages that came from the SS or the Gestapo were immediately relayed to us. And we never would have been able to do that except for this girl who would do anything for Checo that he wanted.
So you and David Sterling had come from Czechoslovakia into another camp in Germany before you went to Colditz.
Yes.
What had happened to Alistair Cram?
Alistair Cram had been left behind at Marisch-Trubau in a hide which we had constructed for ourselves, but for various reasons, it was for David and myself to use, but for various reasons we weren't able to use it. So we put Alistair into it, and then the whole camp was moved to Brunswick. So he was left behind. And what happened to him was that he somehow got to Prague, and in trying to, I had got some addresses in Prague that we thought were safe houses, and I'd given them to Alistair, and one of them turned out not to be a safe house at all, but turned him over to the Gestapo, and he'd had a very bad time with the Gestapo, and turned up in Brunswick, and he'd had enough by then. So he didn't get sent to Colditz because he'd already been in Prague, and so as far as Alistair was concerned, we never saw him again till the end of the war.
But he got back to England?
Yes, yes. After Prague, having survived the Gestapo there, he managed to exist till the end of the war, and then became a judge in Kenya.
Did he really?
Yeah.
When you were in Colditz, when you first went to Colditz, having experienced Gavi, I would imagine that Colditz wasn't such a shock to you as it may have been to some of the others.
Well, you see, Italy was in the war for such a short time that nowhere that you were imprisoned in Italy was very experienced in running prisoner of war camps, because we were only in Italy for about a year. I mean, that's all, and then they were out of the war. In Germany, some of them had been there for 4.5 years, and so a place like Colditz was extremely well organized, and had been for years, with a good library and also completely different type of place.
How did you, when you first went there, did you still have that urge to get away, or
no,
did you realise the war was coming?
No, we didn't have that urge to get away, because on the bulletin board was a notice saying that if you try to escape, you'll be shot.
No.
So that was a very discouraging thing to read. And no, escape was not on the menu from the time we were that we landed in Normandy.
You would have actually been in Colditz when Mike Sinclair was shot?
Yes, yeah, just about a month after we arrived, yeah.
So you saw that notice?
I saw it. I saw him shot. Yeah. But that was different. He took a genuine risk of being shot at. This is what we would all have done. If you were an escaper at all, you didn't. You could be shot at, all right. What nobody was prepared to do was to be caught, stood up, bullet put through your head.
As they had done the 50 men.
Which they'd done before. Yeah. And there was no escape, as far as I know, or attempted escape in Germany from July 1944.
When Mike Sinclair was shot,
yeah,
you say he must have been aware that there was that chance.
Yeah, he
type of escape.
Well, he thought he could do better. He thought that well, he took the chance to do it. It was in the garden at the bottom of Colditz, where we walked around in a circle, and he just took a run at the barbed wire. I mean, it was a foolhardy thing to do, because the war was about to, but he was obsessed with the idea of escaping, and this warning didn't make any difference to him.
And again, he was very unlucky, wasn't he, with the shot that killed him?
That's right. It was a very good shot on the part of, because he was moving fast, and the guard was separated from him by barbed wire, because he'd got over the barbed wire. No, I saw it happen.
So, you were in Colditz from August 44, so...
Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about the actual happenings of Easter that year, or April rather, the when you were liberated, you must have known it was on the way.
Oh yes, one knew, and of course we could see out the window of Colditz. You could see Dresden come down completely. I mean, huge fire. We didn't know that it was what it turned out to be, which was a really devastating thing, but we could see it, and we knew the war was going to soon be over. But also, we weren't all that happy about our status, because there were rumors going around, and one was very sensitive to these things about taking us as hostages, as the Prominenti were. But there was a very strong rumor that the entire Colditz was going to be taken as hostage. We were pretty uneasy in those last days until we were actually freed. And there were an awful lot of rumors going around.
In fact, the commandant was ordered to move you.
Yes, yes. And Willie Todd, the SBO, refused to do that.
How long enough to form an opinion about any of the German staff there? You didn't have much to do with the commandant, I would imagine.
No, I had nothing to do. The Germans it guarded the camps purely from outside. In Italy, you had carabinieri walking around all day, in and out of your room, standing around, sitting on a bed and just looking. In Germany, all the guarding was done outside the camp, and so really we were lucky in having our special contact, which we used to get on when he came on guard at night. But otherwise, you never saw any Germans. And well, the SBO would have contact with the security officer or the commandant, but the ordinary prisoner had no contact at all.
Because a lot of the characters of Colditz, if you like, from the German point of view, like Gephardt and that, they'd all gone by the time you got there, hadn't they?
Yeah, yes, all those original ones.
Preen would have been.
That's right. See, it had been a camp 4.5 years, nearly 5 years. And we only were there for 5 months. What are they? August, September, October, December, January, February, March. Yeah, 8 months.
But and what about were you surprised at all with this setup in the camp from the prisoner's point of view, all the theatre and the lectures?
No, because to a certain extent, in a less well-established way. This was so in other places we'd been among the many, where they had tried to amuse themselves in various ways. But it was, of course, extremely well-organized camp, because it was the oldest one in Germany, and they'd had more time to do these things than anyone else.
Did you learn about the glider when you went there?
Yes, yes. We knew about the glider, and in fact David and I had David arranged it somehow. I don't know how he did, and we never needed to know. But he got us a place on the plane for when it was going to be pushed off. But I'm glad to say we didn't use it. Yes, I know about that. Because great friends of ours in the camp, Tony Rolt, Jack Best and so forth, were friends of ours, and so we knew about it through them.
Well, towards the end, or right at the end, you had this huge influx of French prisoners.
Yes, oh yes.
That must have changed the life in the camp to some
Oh yes. They came in from East Germany, and there must have been 300. There were 350 of us, and there must have been 350 of them. And but that didn't last very long. It was very late in the day, very late in the day. Not enough, not time enough to really make any impression or to be anything more than something that just happened to you.
So you were liberated, the Americans liberated you, and you were driven off after a few, because you spent some days in the town itself, living in the town.
Yeah, because we had our contacts there. We'd had contacts with all sorts of people, and David and I and a couple of others in the intelligence side knew the people, and so we asked if we could go down and live in the town. So we lived in one of the rather grand houses in the town, in normal life for about 3 days until we were moved.
You said you mentioned there the intelligence side. There was obviously this side within the castle when you got there.
No. David and I set this up, and there was a Frenchman called Pierre de Vaumecourt. There was an Arab called Dick Jones. I ran it. There was Checo. There were about 6 people who were in touch with what was going on. The rest of the camp didn't know anything about it at all.
Well, what was your aim in setting that up?
Of knowing what was going on, because we were very nervous about what was going to happen to us, where we were going. We wanted to have as much contact with the Germans as we could to get whatever knowledge we could of what was going to happen to us, of which we were extremely apprehensive.
Had you started to develop any plans to counteract anything that may have...
No, not really. We couldn't have done anything. I mean, it would have been unrealistic to think we could have done anything. The Germans always had in the back of their mind there might be an uprising of prisoners, but there was never any question of that. I never knew of anywhere where, or heard of anywhere where there was an uprising planned. But of course, this is why I say that I think the British, the BBC were very naughty to keep on saying rise up, because this made the Germans very, I don't know why they didn't take more severe steps than they did, quite honestly.
Because at the end, in Colditz town itself, there was an SS presence, I believe.
Yes, there was a Hungarian Jewish factory making something, so there was SS there. But
and you mentioned in the book again that when you were living in the town for these 4 days,
yeah,
you made contact with a Russian group.
Yes, yes.
You had your parties there.
That's right. That's right. We used to. We hadn't had much to drink for 4 years, so we managed to pack quite a lot into the 3 days we were there.
I hope there was no dressing up as potatoes in there.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't.
That made me laugh reading the book again last night.
Yeah.
Must have been an embarrassing moment. So you were taken eventually from the camp by American lorries to...
Yeah.
I believe you said an airfield near Leipzig.
Yeah, I think it was in Leipzig. One was a bit vague about geography, but I think it was Leipzig, yeah.
And you were flown home. Do you remember where to?
Yeah. What's the name of the tube station just outside of London? Begins with U. We're very well known.
Upminster?
No. Anyway, we were flown there, and David and I were told that we would have to stay there for 3 or 4 days because they wanted to interrogate us, because they knew about a lot of things that we had been involved in. It had come through the intelligence network. And David and I said fine, and we then walked out through the gate and into London to the best hotels we could find. We never saw them again. Oh, they got us later on, a couple of months later, and interrogated us. They had every right to want to know, but we didn't have any wish to hang around after 4 years as a prisoner.
I think then David Sterling hatched up a plan to get out to the Far East, didn't he?
Yes, he was planning to take his SAS to Japan, but of course that never came off.
So what happened then? Did you stay in the army after that?
No, I didn't want to stay in the army. I thought that having been a prisoner, it would have been I wouldn't have, had too much of a mark on my dossier. It wasn't true at all. There were a lot of prisoners who became generals. But I was never sorry that I got out of the army, because I've had a much more interesting life since then, in many countries and with many different kinds of people. Because a soldier, see, like lawyers live with lawyers, soldiers live with soldiers, accountants live with accountants. And I haven't lived with anyone. I've lived with all sorts of different people.
So you've travelled a lot since?
Travelled a lot and been in a lot of different situations, from Italy, Angola, all sorts of places, and a lot of people.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely fascinating.
Well,
I mean, the stories of the Italian camps is something that I've never heard before. And the fact that you went into Colditz when it was an established place, where people like Kenneth Lockwood, for example,
had been there 5 years.
And when he'd gone there, he was one of the first British officers there.
That's right. They set the place up, and they'd been there. It was their life for 5 years. One of the things which I don't know whether other prisoners have said this, but the Germans and the Italians never treated us badly. Of course, you complained about everything. They were bastards, and this was simply a reaction of being confined and not being able to do anything. But in actual fact, except for being hungry, we were supposed to be given the same ration as the local people, but the local people did a lot of black market trading, and they could get bulk by buying grain. We were always hungry. And if you want to say that we had any hardship, we were hungry, that's all. Otherwise, we were extremely well treated by both detaining powers. And I mean, beyond complaining every day what bastards they were, if you look at it impartially, we were extremely well treated. Yes. I mean, Colditz had a very good library. And we got newspapers every day, Völkische Beobachter, Corriere della Sera. The Japanese didn't have anything to read for 4 years, and I cannot imagine what that would do to you.
And of course they weren't getting Red Cross parcels, were they?
No, they weren't getting Red Cross parcels. They never knew what was happening in the world about them, because they were never told. It must have been an absolutely punishing experience. Awful.
And of course, out there to escape.
Oh, there's no point.
No.
No point. I think one person went out in the jungle, and I think he managed to get away. One person only among them.
And of course, if they were captured, they were executed.
Oh yes. No, that's quite a different story, the Japanese. I mean, that has nothing to do with what happened to us in Europe. Nothing.
So all in all, I remember speaking to one of your colleagues, and I said, when you look back on those wartime experiences, I mean, for him, the actual fighting war was very, very short.
Yeah.
You actually had a bit longer before you were captured. But looking back on that experience, were there any benefits as far as you were concerned? Well, the benefit for me was that I developed a liking for reading and studying, which has enabled me, for instance, to get a BA honors degree from the Open University, because I learned how to read and how to study, and learned to like it. And that was when you sat down with your book as a prisoner, you didn't have to worry about money or your family or anything. You could really concentrate, and that was an enormous advantage. And I put that as first among. And of course, you must have forged some incredible friendships. Yes. I wouldn't say that was
a very important part, because I was with so many people, probably 50,000 people, and for such a short time. You see, if you're in 11 camps in 3.5 years, you don't you get to know anyone really. My friends were David Sterling, Alistair Cram, and that really was it. Otherwise, the other people went through ones. Came and went. At Eichstätt, which, as you know, had all the Dunkirk prisoners. We knew quite a few people when we got there, because they were regular soldiers for the most part, and the war had only been on for 2 years. So we had a few friends there, but the rest of the time it was in and out.
So you must have known those officers from Sandhurst?
From Sandhurst, or yeah.
Because most of the officers that were captured in northern France,
they were all professional soldiers.
and it was right at the start of the
That's right.
1940s.
Some of them went from Sandhurst into the bag in 2 weeks. You know, they got their commission, were landed in France, were captured, and then at Eichstätt within a couple of weeks.
What about the prisoner characters in Colditz when you arrived there? Because of the type of place it was, a lot of the people there were actually characters in their own right, like Varda we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
Did any of them actually spring to mind when you think about it?
Oh yes. I made some good friends there. One was Bor Komorowski, who was the general who led the Warsaw Uprising. He was a good friend, and I saw a lot of him.
Were you, you would have been in the Saal House, would you? Because you were more senior to many of them.
That's right. I was with the field officers.
Yeah. And of course David Sterling
Was same thing. We had the same room.
Yeah.
And Pierre de Vaumecourt, who was one of the first people into the French resistance, remained a great friend of mine for the rest of his life. And there were a few regular officers that I knew from Sandhurst who were there, who had been friends of mine before and who continued to be. No, I made some friends in Colditz mainly because they were professional soldiers who I had reason to know before. But in all the other camps, they were people in and out, New Zealanders, Poles, whatever they were.
much bigger numbers of people.
In much bigger numbers. See, in 11 camps, probably that's probably 100,000 people.
Really. One memory that sticks out from all your prisoner of war experience, that
Gavi. Oh yes, that was by any calculation a quite extraordinary experience. To get out, to stay out, it was unique, absolutely unique.
Well, thank you ever so much. I think that's about as far as we can go, but
All right.
it's a fascinating story.
Well, I hope it's been of some use to you, and you may